Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who have joined already. Welcome to this last webinar for the year from Digite Swift Kanban. And I'm very glad to welcome David Anderson, the man himself, the Kanban pioneer. And I'll give an introduction to him in just a second. Uh, Kanban comes of age. That's the topic for the webinar today. In these times that demand organizational resilience, the Kanban maturity model is here to help. And I'm looking forward to a great session by David and a great Q&A after that. Hopefully, many of you have been curious about the topic or have already been working with the Kanban maturity model and have questions that you would like to get addressed or contribute to it yourself. So looking forward to that. So let's get started, and I'm going to start on the agenda. So some introductions, a quick word about Digitize Swift Kanban, and then I will hand over the session to David. Kanban comes of age, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end. Um, the webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you as usual. Feel free to ask questions using the questions or the chat box that you'll see on the right-hand side of your screens, and we will take as many of those as possible at the end of the webinar. So with that, David, I don't know that any of you need an introduction to David, but nevertheless, for those of you who may not, he is the CEO of David J. Anderson School of Management, and of course involved with the Kanban University and other organizations related to the Kanban method. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I am co-founder here at Digite and run marketing as well as consulting for Digite. A little bit more about David. David has been active in the technology field forever, and he's started working on the Kanban method probably since the mid 2000s, and a real pioneer in the entire body of knowledge. And of course, he wrote the initial book on the Kanban method, and of course has sort of built, along with the support of the Kanban community that he's built up, the complete sort of body of knowledge for Kanban, enterprise services planning, the fit for purpose framework, and of course the Kanban maturity model that we'll be talking about today. And of course, all of that has been applied not only to software and technology organizations, but a wide variety of businesses that have benefited from the Kanban method in their own context. He's the author of the books, several books. Kanban maturity model is one of them. Fit for purpose, the initial blue book, the Kanban successful evolutionary change for technology and business, and many others. Before like I said, hand over the session to him, just a little bit about Digite. We have been in the tooling business since 2002 and in the lean, agile, application lifecycle management, portfolio management space since the beginning, helping distributed teams collaborate more effectively. We are headquartered here in Cupertino, California, and have offices in Europe and in India. Nearly 1 million users of our products around the world, and like I said, focus on lean and agile very heavily, and provide some of the most effective tools for enterprise agility in your organizations. Swift Kanban and Swift ESP in particular are products that we build directly with inputs from David and many of our partners in the Kanban community. And it's been an honor working with David all these years, getting some of the sort of knowledge directly from the source, so to speak. Swift Kanban is being used a lot across the different functions of an organization. Obviously, the IT and software functions use it the most, but it also gets used outside of that by marketing, legal, HR, procurement, product design, all kinds of functions. A lot of personal Kanban also finds its use in Swift Kanban, and just a variety of different functions. One of the strongest capabilities that we have is of visual portfolio management and the ability to sort of run risk management and portfolio management initiatives using Swift Kanban and the ESP module. And so you're able to model a variety of different, very sophisticated Kanban boards, which can be there in a hierarchy to run portfolios, program initiatives, OKRs, and of course the execution that goes along with it to show what kind of work is being done on those. So you get to define this kind of hierarchy. The ESP module provides very sophisticated risk modeling capability where you can do risk profiling of your different initiatives and make sure that you're selecting the right things at the right time in terms of various factors that you take up in terms of their prioritization. And the module also provides a variety of different tools for you to really be able to forecast effectively at the right levels of confidence to ensure that your customers are confident about the forecasts or estimates that you're giving them. The base analytics that Swift Kanban provides are very popular and very effective in terms of their support for the Kanban method. And then just a little bit on the integrations, we integrate with all of the sort of commonly used tools from Jira, TFS, Rally to a variety of others. And then just this last slide here, just to give you an idea of what are some of the customers that we have. And we have customers that range from small teams of 10 to 50 people to tens of thousands of users using some of our products. Before I hand over to David, we just wanted to run a quick poll here to get an idea of who the audience is. So I'm going to ask Nishant to quickly show the audience. We want to know how long have you been practicing Kanban. If you could just respond to that and let us know what your experience with Kanban is, that will give us an idea about where you are in your overall Kanban journey. All right, I think give it a couple of more seconds and then we can share the results. Okay, shall we see the results? All right, so David, you have a pretty mature audience with 1 to 3 years or more than 3 years, about 70% of the audience. So I'm sure everybody is excited about the topic. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to David for his session. David, a very warm welcome. Thank you for doing this at the end of the year. I know it's been a hectic season for you the last few weeks, but all of us are looking forward to this. The session is yours.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. I think that it's really been a hectic year for all of us. It's definitely been a challenging year, I think, for folks like you and I, perhaps the most challenging business year in our careers. And for the younger staff who work for me, and I'm sure that work for you too, I think a career-defining year, that they will be stronger and more resilient having lived through this year. So it's been a busy time for us. It's been a busy time reinventing how we deliver Kanban training online, delivering the new Kanban Maturity Model 1.2, which we'll talk about, and many infographics and accompanying materials, as well as some applications to help navigate the Kanban world and fill some of the holes that existing tools don't do. So we've been incredibly busy, arguably busier than any year, and it's been a challenging time, particularly with so many people stuck at home and learning to adapt their lives to working from home. I'm sure many of you in the audience today have gone through similar things. So let's finally get started on this Kanban Comes of Age. Here we are, December 2020. Let me just pour some more of my tea. And rewind back 16 years and 2 months, and that's the night that I met a gentleman called Dragos Dimitriou, who was a project manager at Microsoft in their IT division. And he came to see me speak at this American Society for Quality dinner, actually in a Honeywell building just across the freeway from Microsoft's campus. And here's his receipt. He paid $24 for the session, including the dinner. And after my session, he came up to me and he said, you know, I'd like to talk to you. I've volunteered to run the department inside Microsoft IT with the worst customer service record in the whole division. So out of 3,500 people, he had volunteered to manage the organization with the worst record, the worst customer service record. And he asked if I might help him to fix it. And the outcome of that is what we now call the Kanban method. We still use that case study in our Kanban system design KMP1 training class. And to cut to the end of that story in early 2006, we had trebled the productivity of that department. We had reduced the average delivery times from 5.5 months to 11 or 12 days and improved their on-time due date performance from 0% to 98%. So that was quite good. Dragos got promoted. Very nice. We thought we might try it again. And here we are, over 16 years later, and we're still doing it. Kanban is still developing. So Kanban's really come of age after 16 years, and now tens of thousands of people around the world, pretty much every continent apart from Antarctica, companies large and small, companies young and old, all doing it. But the interesting thing is all doing it differently, all doing their own sort of variations of it. But 5 years ago, we had enough observations of these different ways of doing it and enough case studies that I began to correlate patterns of implementation with patterns of organizational behavior and maturity. And the outcome of that line of thinking produced the Kanban Maturity Model. And I've been working on this together with Teodora Bozeva for most of the last 5 years. We published the first book on it 2.5 years ago based on the beta release. Then we had the second beta, then the 1.0, a small increment to 1.1 in those 2 years. Then in the last 6 months, we delivered KMM 1.2. So if the beta in the first book was the minimum viable product, KMM 1.2 and the new book, which is over 500 pages, has more than 220 new illustrations and 12 supporting infographic posters. This is really the final product. It's a launch product now. It's good to go at large scale in big organizations. It's tried and tested through the beta program, and it's mature in itself. So with the arrival of the KMM, 16 years after we got started, Kanban has truly come of age. Now this picture explains the concept of organizational maturity, because it's not the Kanban that matures, it's the organization that matures. And the way that they use Kanban changes as their organization improves. So this is a picture from one of our infographic posters. We just refer to this one as the pizza poster, as you might imagine, and it describes a takeaway or home delivery pizza restaurant at 6 different levels of maturity. It describes the service level you experience, the process that they experience inside, and the overall customer experience, how satisfied you are with the outcome at each of the 7 levels. So level 0, my way, it's just a group of individuals working, and kind of depends. If you're the customer, depends who makes your pizza tonight. Level 1, never the same way twice, because they don't have a consistent process they follow. It depends who's working the shift. A bit of team working, it's not so individualistic, but it's totally inconsistent. Level 2, never the same result twice. They now have a consistent process and new staff are trained in the process, but there's still a lot of variability in the outcome. As a customer, you experience perhaps badly baked pizza or pizza that wasn't delivered within your expectations. It's not until we get to level 3 that the business is consistent enough to deliver on your expectations and keep you as a customer happy pretty much all the time. By level 4, not only can they keep you as a customer happy, they can keep all the other stakeholders happy. Investors, owners, regulatory authorities, bankers, whoever else might have some interest in the sustained success of this business. So level 4 is about keeping everyone happy without sacrificing customer service, without sacrificing quality, without sacrificing the outcome and the customer experience. Level 5 is about becoming the best, simply the best, the market leader, to be the reference, the archetype that everyone else wants to copy. And then level 6 is the concept that we can manage the reinvention of the business, particularly in times of crisis, that it's not reactionary, it's strategic, and it's thoughtful, that we are anticipatory, and that we have an ability to go in different directions depending on how the market evolves around us. So these are the basic concept of organizational maturity, 7 levels, and we see different patterns of Kanban implementation at each of these 7 levels. So we've come to understand these patterns over the last 5 to 10 years, correlating them with different levels of organizational maturity, looking at client implementations and case studies and experience reports, listening to the behavior of those businesses, and then looking at how they had implemented Kanban. And really strong, clear correlations became apparent, and those are now built into the practice map for the Kanban Maturity Model. So if you can identify the maturity of your organization, its behavior, how it copes with crisis and stress, how it manages risk, whether it's reactionary or anticipatory, and so on and so on, then you can select a style of Kanban implementation which is appropriate for that organization, one which they should be capable of implementing, from which they will benefit, and there shouldn't be a significant resistance to the adoption. In addition to that, we've also codified the concept of managed evolutionary change to be able to drive, using Kanban and the Kanban method, to drive from one level of maturity to the next, to take your existing comfort zone, your existing equilibrium. Perhaps it's a maturity level 1 organization with a team-focused Kanban implementation, and you want to take that to the next level. Well, you have to disrupt that equilibrium. You have to provoke people, catalyze them to feel a little bit uncomfortable, to feel unhappy with the status quo. And we know how to do that in a consistent, codified manner. And then once we make people unhappy with the current situation, they may be anxious, they may have anxiety about what it will take to get to the next level, to stabilize at some greater level of maturity and greater performance in terms of customer outcomes. So we've also identified those practices which are harder to adopt, that meet with resistance, that generally create the inertia that prevents improving organizational maturity. And we've codified all the countermeasures to those. All of this is built into the Kanban Maturity Model. It's why it's a 500-page book. The KMM itself is architecturally organized in this fashion. We have our 7 organizational maturity levels, only room for 5 in this picture. And we're showing those on the rows. And then the general practices of the Kanban method: visualize, limiting work in progress, managing flow, make policies explicit, implement feedback loops. and evolve experimentally, improve collaboratively. They're on the columns. So each one of these boxes, each cell in this table, represents the practices, the specific practices for a general practice implemented at a particular level of organizational maturity. So if I take my mouse pointer, and hopefully you can see this, you see that the box here, this is maturity level 2, organizational maturity level 2, and we have visualization practices which are appropriate for that level. You'll also notice that the box, in fact, the entire row is split into 2 sub-levels known as transition and consolidation. And if momentarily I flip back to the previous picture, the transition level is the upper half of this evolutionary change model diagram on the right. It's about disrupting the equilibrium, making people feel a little bit uncomfortable, a little unhappy with the status quo. And then the consolidation level practices are about consolidating to the next level of maturity, and practices that may meet with resistance, but we've codified the countermeasures for overcoming that resistance. This is the core architecture of the Kanban maturity model, and there's a number of innovations here which are novel in comparison to maturity models which may have preceded the KMM. The focus on outcomes, the focus on organizational culture, and then specifically the managed evolution and the transition and consolidation sublevels. These are all unique innovations in the Kanban maturity model. This is the cartoon from the cover of the now famous Kanban book, which is more than 10 years old. And this cartoon captures the essence of the Kanban method in a single picture. Just excuse me a second while I pour a little bit more of my tea. And the formula for driving evolutionary change is this concept that there must be some stress, just enough stress to make people feel uncomfortable. There must be a reflection mechanism so that they can reflect upon the stress and the discomfort. And then there must be an act of leadership. And the cartoon shows all 3 of these. That we see from the conversation that things are not well in the world, there's some stress. We see from the board in the background, and if you have any familiarity with Kanban, you'll recognize that the picture, the board in the background there, doesn't represent an ideal looking situation. So we have some discomfort, we have a reflection mechanism. They're having their Kanban meeting, they're standing in front of the board, they're talking about it. And then the 4th character in the cartoon says, let's do something about it. We have an act of leadership. We have the catalyst to make change. This is the essence of the Kanban method. And now we've codified that with our formula for evolutionary change in this evolutionary change model, which you see here. And while this particular picture looks a little abstract, you apply it to each level and you use the practices from the transition sublevel or the consolidation sublevel or our coaching practices, which are codified also in the book and we teach in the Kanban coaching practices class. You use those to navigate through the consolidation sublevel and achieve the next level of organizational maturity. Therefore, the next level of improved outcomes for your customers and other stakeholders. So all of this work has enabled what I think will be the greatest innovation and most important concept in Kanban for the next decade and beyond. We can now do Kanban by numbers. We can simply look at a maturity level, level 1, and we can see from the practice implementations, the Kanban patterns, practices, metrics, whatever it might be, which are used at that level. So if you can identify a maturity level 1 organization, you now have a prescription for more or less what their Kanban implementation should look like. So we have here a picture of a pretty typical team Kanban board. And the feedback mechanisms, the Kanban cadences at maturity level 1, the Kanban meeting at the bottom of the picture, the workflow replenishment meeting, pulling new work into a Kanban board from a backlog or something of this nature. A flow review meeting to talk about, are the tickets moving? And the blocker clustering, actually, I really apologize. This is the level 2. There's a bug in the slides. And I realize it's just a bug. The wrong slide has been pasted. So we'll try to fix this for the future and get fixed. There should be a level 1 picture here and it's not available. I apologize. Metrics at level 1, per person WIP limits, team WIP limits, local lead time, and the rate of tasks completed. And level 1 tends to be very task oriented. Customers wouldn't necessarily recognize the tickets on a team board. At level 2, we start to become customer driven and we start to see multiple teams cooperating in some fashion. And the tickets on the board now tend to be customer recognizable work items or piece parts of some customer recognizable delivery. So they really represent value. And we would expect to see a focus on flow now that we have multiple teams cooperating together. So we start to visualize blocking issues, we start to visualize defects, anything that prevents flow from happening. And the introduction of blocker clustering meeting, the analyzing the blocker tickets that we've harvested from the board. Swift Kanban's had this functionality for years now. It's a very good feature, very useful for maturity level 2 organizations. Metrics at level 2, demand and capability related metrics, how much the customer asking for, how much are we capable of delivering, our due date performance, how long are things blocked, how many blockers, what's the probability of something blocking and for how long. How old are the tickets on the board? How many defects, how much rework are we suffering? How much failure demand perhaps compared with customer value demand? And generally speaking, we're now timestamping when we start something and when it's finished, and we get this emergent concept of lead time, how long it took to flow through our organization. And we saw this a moment ago, the maturity level 2, Kanban cadences, a workflow Kanban meeting, multiple teams in front of the board together, workflow replenishment from a backlog, a flow review meeting to talk about how well tickets are flowing, and the blocker clustering activity in order to provide input analysis for the flow review. Maturity level 3, now we're fit for purpose, we can meet customer expectations, and this is where we really start to see proper Kanban systems, end-to-end pull system with WIP limits the whole way through. So the flow of work here is regulated to the slowest moving part of the system, and we only pull new work in at the front as other work is completed further downstream. This is really the level of Kanban where we got started 16 years ago. And we start to see more elaborate feedback mechanisms. And this latest picture highlights both the concept of upstream, often referred to as discovery Kanban, for discovery and innovation activities, as well as downstream. So the bottom 3 tickets here, we have our workflow Kanban meeting, we have our full replenishment meeting. It's a proper triage meeting now. And we have a separate delivery planning meeting, anticipating deliveries and coordinating those. And we have that workflow for each service in the network that represents our organization. We have a service delivery review for the downstream Kanban. We have a service request review for upstream Kanban if it's present. The blocker clustering has matured into something called the service risk review. And we also have an improvement suggestion review. We start thinking about how to improve the processes, improve the workflows, improve the network of services, but in a somewhat rudimentary fashion. We also start to introduce concepts around what does it mean to be fit for purpose, and the fit for purpose framework helps us with that. It helps us with choosing the right metrics. It helps us to understand what customers care about. And we start seeing use of forecasting, even if it's relatively rudimentary, using function of averages such as Little's law. We see some rudimentary study of the flow efficiency, and we start looking at upstream metrics like the discard rate and the number of aborted items that we have that we committed to and then didn't deliver. Moving on to maturity level 4, we get really quite sophisticated Kanban systems at this stage. We now have multiple services on a single board, multiple work item types, multiple classes of service. We have capacity allocation to hedge risk across different types of work, across different classes of risk, different classes of service. Of course, we still have the end-to-end pool that we inherited from maturity level 3. And we have yet more sophisticated feedback mechanisms. The boxes in orange here we've already talked about, but our risk review now matures to an organization level risk review, and our improvement suggestion becomes a full operations review meeting, and we introduce for the first time a strategy review to talk about the services we're offering and our capability versus the expectations that the external market has. So we start to incorporate more concepts from the Fit for Purpose book and the Fit for Purpose framework, as well as much more mature Kanban implementation. So 10 years ago, when I first started writing about Kanban, the blue book contains a description of a Kanban implementation at this level of sophistication. What we learned since then is that most organizations are not ready for this. They're more likely ready for maturity level 1 or level 2, maybe 3, but they're going to have to evolve to get to level 4. So the guidance that we needed and we didn't understand or comprehend, that I certainly didn't understand or comprehend 10 years ago, we needed guidance that met people where they were now and helped them with a Kanban implementation suitable for their current organizational maturity. And we also needed guidance that helped them move from one level to the next in an incremental roadmap. We now have all of that. The Kanban Maturity Model delivers on this need. And for that reason, Kanban has really come of age. At maturity level 4, we start seeing detailed flow efficiency metrics, use of probabilistic forecasting and simulation, quantitative measures and analysis, much more sophisticated metrics use. So you can now implement Kanban by numbers. You can implement it from maturity level 0 through to 5. Here in this talk, I only focused on 1 through 4. And you can do that straight out of the book or straight off the poster. That we now have the level of sophistication that tools such as Swift Kanban can offer templated patterns that will allow you to get started. Pick a maturity level 1 Kanban implementation, and the tool can provide that for you as a template, or level 2 or level 3 or level 4. Pick the pattern that fits your organization, and then manage your evolution to deeper implementations by using the Kanban Maturity Model as your roadmap, as your guide, the Kanban coaching practices as your mechanism for coaching, catalyzing, cajoling the organization to make improvements. So with a pattern to suit every situation, Kanban's the method that refreshes the parts that other methods just cannot reach. If you liked what you saw here and you prefer online access rather than a 500-page book, the entire contents of the book, practice by practice, and all 12 of the infographic posters are implemented in our new online service, KMM Plus. You can subscribe to the full service for as little as €5 per month. Or available for download, all the infographic posters, you can have them printed at your leisure, put them up on the walls, very useful reference. And the second edition of the book, based on KMM 1.2, is available from Amazon. And with that, thank you very much from me and the School of Management. And I think we'll cut back to Mahesh and take some questions.
Thank you, David. Great talk and a great summary of the Kanban method. Folks, if you have questions, please post them on the using the questions box on your screens, and we'll take those up as they come in. David, let me ask you a question that I'm sure you've seen that many times in the companies that we have been involved with, and they have been sort of across the spectrum, from getting really early start to their Kanban implementation, to people who've been doing it for multiple years, and then looking for a tool like of Kanban. At any point, organizations exhibit behaviors which are across multiple levels of maturity. For example, they may have Kanban boards which map or which model multiple services on the same board, so they have multiple swim lanes on the same board. They may have personal WIP limits as well as the flow WIP limits. But then they're also not doing many of the things, and they may not really have a I would say genuine understanding of either the overall method or certainly the deeper aspects of implementing Kanban for improving as an overall business function. Assuming that they are, let's say, exhibiting level 3 behavior as well, would they still, when you start to look at the Kanban maturity model, would you still expect them to sort of focus on improving level by level? So would they sort of go back to examining their behavior at level 1 and say, okay, what are the things that we need to do to be fully level 1 or level 2 or whatever be the context compliant before they sort of move up the maturity curve? And I hate to use the word compliance, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying.
So if I understood the question correctly, you're saying they're already capable of producing maturity level 3 outcomes.
Well, whether they're capable or not, they're doing it, and may or may not be effectively doing it, but they're certainly showing that. For example, just the 3 levels or three swim lanes to show 3 different service lines in the same Kanban board. They may have simply visualized it, and they may be managing their work on the same Kanban board. But in terms of actual behavior, actual quality of work, they may not be. But they're showing that, and therefore they might think that they are at level 3 maturity.
So what determines a level is observable outcomes. It's nothing to do with Kanban practice adoption. That's the core. So to be level 3, you have to be capable of meeting your customer expectations a lot, right? I can't put a number on it because it'll depend on your customer. But if we go and ask the customer, are you happy with the service you get from this particular organization? Every single customer we ask should answer yes, more or less. Maybe the odd one that says no. But the vast majority should reply, yes, we're satisfied. And that's the definition of level 3. It's nothing to do with what Kanban pattern that happen to be using.
All right. All right. There's a question from Jorge, I guess on cheese. I hope I apologize for
Jorge
mispronouncing.
Ronchese from Argentina.
There you go. Okay. So his question
Nice,
is,
nice to hear from you.
have you been skiing, and can we match maturity level with slope difficulties?
So actually, it's actually dark, but if I look out my window here, I can see a cable car going up to a mountain where I can ski, and it's covered in snow. And if I look over this way, I can no window on this side of the apartment, but there's another cable car that goes up a mountain and it's covered in snow. There is no skiing. It's Corona.
Corona.
So there's no skiing. Can you compare slope difficulties with maturity levels? It's an interesting question. So the idea would be like at level 6 that it's off-piste skiing altogether. To some extent, the answer is yes, because difficulty levels are about capability, and they're about practice, mastery of certain practices. And quite a few of my friends in this village have been in the past ski instructors. And the Austrians take their ski instructing very seriously. They take skiing very seriously. Like Canadians take curling very seriously, if you know what curling is. Like if someone who's a famous curler dies, the Canadians lower the flag to the half mast. The Austrians take skiing seriously in that same way. So they take a pride in the fact that their coaching method is very mature and very effective. So they have this concept of different practices and how to disrupt the equilibrium of someone might be a very comfortable basic skier who can do snowplow turns, and they could live their whole life at that level. That's sort of maturity level 1 skiing, where level 0 is basically you know how to put the skis on, how to walk, how to fall over, how to pick yourself back up again. So a ski instructor knows how to recognize a skier at a certain level of capability, a certain level of competence. And if they're a professionally trained ski instructor, which nowadays it's not so common, in the old days, before it was deregulated, all ski instructors had to be certified. They had to pass a rigorous training program and pass examinations and so on. But it's no longer the case. But in the old days of the certified ski instructors, they had the playbook. They had the capability to look at someone, recognize what level they were at, and they knew exactly in their head what they had to do next to make that person a little bit uncomfortable with their current level of performance, and which practices they had to teach them, which exercises to rehearse in order to take them to the next level. So in that sense, there is a similarity that the Kanban coaching approach using the Kanban Maturity Model is a sports coaching approach. And skiing's a fairly reasonable, because it's very codified in terms of different levels of difficulty. So skiing is actually quite a good way of thinking about it. So thanks for the question.
I can say from personal experience that I know of, I think I can relate to it very well, that I know people at different levels of maturity, so to speak, and many of them quite happy to remain where they are because they don't, they see too much risk going to the next level of maturity
It's a
for the skiing.
comfort zone.
Yeah,
It totally is, yeah. And the commercial business of selling ski lessons is to create the desire for people to be at the next level.
excellent. Right.
Because if they're happy in their comfort zone, they don't buy lessons, and therefore a whole section of the local economy here in the Austrian Alps doesn't make money.
Right, right. All right. This question from Paul Ramos. How can we make an assessment using KMM? Is this initially a poll set of poll questions that you can ask to say where they are in their current level?
So that's becoming, I think, the most frequently asked question. In
Right.
terms of a formal appraisal method, we're still working on that. That's a project for Theodora and some other folks. And perhaps with KMM 1.3, I don't want to promise, but perhaps we'll have a formal appraisal method that would enable parts of an organization, if you like, to be certified as achieving a certain level. But we don't have that at the moment. On the other hand, we have extensive descriptions of recognizable business outcomes and organizational culture, and of course the practice mapping with more than 150 practices mapped against different uh, organizational maturity levels. So in our Kanban coaching practices class, we teach Kanban coaches how to be able to walk into an organization and very quickly figure out what level they're at. Now, to come back to the skiing analogy from the previous question, back in the days of certified ski instructors and high quality ski lessons, the the ski schools here in these villages were typically run by two or three very experienced people, sometimes some of them former ski racers or champions. And there was a role at the ski school, very high ranking, but not the highest level. But that role was to be the grader, the chief grader. So you can imagine that on a Monday morning, a few thousand tourists have turned up and they've signed up for ski lessons. And they all have to line up somewhere at the top of the mountain, and they're asked just to do their own thing, ski one at a time, make 2 or 3 turns, and then they will be told which class they're being put into. And the chief grader's job is to stand there between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the morning, watching hundreds of people skiing past him, just 1, 2, 3 turns, and then immediately assign them into a class graded, if you like, from 0 to 7.
Wow. Okay.
Typically 1 to 5. Well, with sufficient experience, that the graders' accuracy levels greater than 99%. So the chance of you being assigned to a ski class which is the wrong level for your current capability was negligible. In fact, in the years when I was learning in the late 80s, early 90s, I only saw one occasion where a person had been wrongly assigned and had to be moved to a different class. So with experience, your brain learns to recognize the patterns very quickly.
Yep. Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, Although I can't imagine standing in a place, single spot in cold conditions, waiting for watching people ski down and not be active
The,
yourself.
the interesting thing for me is I now know, after all these years, I now know how that's done.
Okay.
I know the things, the body positions and the movements and so on that they were looking for, that were the telltales of level 1, level 3, or level 5,
Okay.
that they could tell very quickly. And an extra level of difficulty, they're assuming that the tourist has arrived and has not done any skiing that winter and is generally not in very good physical shape. So they're really stiff on the first morning. They've had no warm up, no practice. And the grader has to factor that into his reasoning.
Correct.
That he has to realize that what I just saw is worse than the person will be by lunchtime today. Now, a non-trivial thing. And then so take that and now apply it to like organizations for IT development or something. Obviously, it's a more complicated thing, but we've produced a very rich roadmap to help you with that. It's just experience. You need to read it, you need to think about it, you need to practice it, and you'll get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of people who commented that the KMM.plus site is not, actually one person said that, Gordon, but I just checked and the site is up and running. So as far as I can tell, it is working fine. For those of you who are trying out the KMM.plus site.
It's just KMM.plus. There's no .com or anything on there.
Correct. Steve Smith asks, will you be providing more guidance on how to use the Kanban method to manage a portfolio of projects and products? And I suppose that's a class question, which class might provide them, provide a way to get started.
So we made a decision with KMM 1.2 to remove all of the project, program, and portfolio management specific practices. And instead, we're putting those into a separate extension. The reason for that is largely we consider projects, programs, and not so much portfolio, but projects and programs to be old paradigm. And therefore, you want to live in the 20th century, but apply a bit of Kanban to help you do it better, to be better at being in the last century. Then we're providing a separate piece of guidance for that. Because the core concept of the Kanban method is enterprise services planning. It's the idea that you have an organic organization, which is a network of services. And that pure concept is contained in the KMM. So there are examples of practices in the KMM 1.2 that we've published which can be applied to a project, but the guidance in the book doesn't tell you how to do that. We're going to publish a separate, much smaller book. Theodora's working on it already. I'm tired, it's been a long year, but Theodora's still, Energizer Bunny, she's still working on it. So sometime next year, I think probably in the spring, winter, I think too soon, but in the spring, there will be the project, program, and portfolio management extension. And we'll be mapping those practices at mostly level 2, 3, and 4. So you'll be able to see how a practice matures. That at level 2 in a portfolio board, you tend to have a big fat column and the tickets kind of slide across. But at level 3 and 4, we can add additional sophistication there. So some of the caveat charts, for example, that Mahesh showed earlier, you layer that on to a basic portfolio board so that the ticket on the board now has the risk profile. Suddenly, you're maturing towards a maturity level 4. So expect that. Expect a separate infographic poster, a separate practice map, and a separate thinner book. I don't want to call it a mini book because it's probably going to be in the 150 or 200 page range, but expect that next year. That's one of our core deliverables. We recognize that we have to meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of our customers would be interested in that because they are obviously in the project delivery business, and that is key for them. All right. Here's a question that I would also be interested to hear answer, and I think I know what it is, but still, it's the questioner has asked it to be anonymous. I'm not sure if that is the intent, but is Jira justified in level 0, level 1, level 2, or any higher Kanban maturity levels?
So, we have to meet people where they are, and if they're using Jira, they're using Jira. It's the reality of it.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to get beyond level 2 using Jira. very difficult. It's difficult to get to level 2, I think is fair. It's very difficult to get beyond level 2. There are several challenges. The core challenge is Jira is not architected for evolutionary change. And pure Kanban tools like Swift Kanban were architected for that from the ground up. Jira also does not support the metrics and the type of collaboration. And if you look at the visualization patterns, just a simple test of how many of the visualization patterns in the KMM can you implement in a tool? Well, Swift Kanban and a couple of their other strong Kanban competitors, they can do almost every pattern in the book. Jira probably can't do more than a third of them.
Yeah, great. So I was going to also add that actually, in terms of just purely mapping the Kanban board itself, leave alone the rest of the things, whether it's WIP limits or flow visual metrics and things like that, but you can't do in tools like Jira. Anyway.
The core message that we want to put across there, and there's a chapter in the book towards the end on barriers to adoption, and I took the gloves off there and I said, you know, if you're using Jira, that's a barrier to adoption. It's a barrier to adoption of higher maturity. And if you read the organizational culture and business outcomes descriptions for those higher levels, what we're really saying is if your organization continues to use Jira, you could be, depending on the size, the scale of your business, you could be leaving hundreds of millions of dollars of profit on the table. That your ability to run your business more effectively, more efficiently, faster, with better customer service, more competitively, is being impaired by the fact that you're using the wrong tool to manage your workflow.
Very good. So there's a question from a good friend, Dennis Arslan, sorry. And his question is one that I think is fairly common for a lot of Kanban teams and especially the leadership, to get people to respect WIP limits or to manage WIP limits effectively. So his question is, WIP limits are implemented but somehow ignored totally. Do you have any hints on how to deal with WIP limit violations?
So the maturity levels are all very well, outcomes, definitions, that they're all very well. People have to care, right? So if you meet a maturity level 1 organization and nobody gives a damn about customers, then you're never going to get to level 2. And if you meet a level 2 organization and people know there's customers, but nobody actually gives a damn whether they serve those customers effectively or not, you're never going to get to level 3. So when it comes to WIP limits or anything else for that matter, it comes down fundamentally to values. And we've codified the values in the Kanban Maturity Model. They appear on many of the posters. There's an entire section of the book describing them. And values adoption requires the right leadership. The organizational maturity is always going to be hindered by the leadership maturity. Now, some of that material I have presented in keynote speeches. It's still relatively nascent. I've developed it a bit more recently. Some of it appeared in my Kanban India keynote last week. But that leadership material currently in the KMM 1.2 is relatively thin. It's a section of 1 chapter with somewhat generic advice. By the 1.3 release in the next, say, 2 years from now in 2022, that leadership material will be much more developed. However, it will all appear on KMM Plus much sooner than a 1.3 release of KMM. So whether it's WIP limits or any other practice, people need to value them. They need to value why they're doing it. They need to value the outcome that it should help with, and to communicate that we hold that value as an organization, you need the leadership. So WIP limit violation comes down to organizational culture, lack of the right values, lack of leadership.
Absolutely. Um, one of the analogies that I usually talk about in the customer engagement that we have is of poor quality Indian restaurants being run in small town America, where the clientele is mostly non-Indian, and so they have zero idea what good Indian food is like, and so the restaurant owner can pretty much serve anything that they want and call it Indian food, and the clientele either likes it or doesn't, but they believe that that is Indian food, right?
Yes.
And it is, as you said, it is up to the leadership value to say, I'm going to actually, do justice to Indian cooking, or I'm just going to run an Indian restaurant. Doesn't matter what it serves.
Yeah, so that's fundamentally values driven, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it's people ask me, because obviously in the old world, I travel all around the world, and I've lived in some interesting places like Singapore, and I've raced mountain bikes in Indonesia and Malaysia and things like this in a past life. And people will ask me, what types of food do you like? Which ethnic food do you like? And I say, I love all ethnic food as long as it's authentic, right?
Right.
If I'm eating Indonesian food, I want authentic Indonesian food. If I'm eating Peruvian food, I want authentic Peruvian food, and so on. And therefore, my rule has always been, if I'm going in a Japanese restaurant, I want to see real Japanese people in there. Ideally, I want the staff to be Japanese. I want the sushi chef in the back to be Japanese. And even just little things, the authenticity, like how they've laid out the chopsticks, will tell me whether it's authentic or not. How they serve the soup will tell me if there's a spoon in the soup, it's not authentic. Right? And regardless of the ethnicity, I'm looking, for an Indian restaurant, I want Indian people in there,
Right.
eating it. And you're right that it comes down to the owner's view of what are we doing here as a business?
Mhm.
And if we're cooking Indian style food for non-Indians, then as long as we recognize that that's who we are, that that's our identity, then it's still authentic in the sense that they're living up to their own self-image.
Right.
But if they've got a sign outside that makes you, an Indian gentleman, think, oh, home, and then you come and it's doesn't meet your expectations, well, from that customer segment perspective, it's not fit for purpose.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And unfortunately, it has happened all too often. Although I think Canada is different. Canada has some amazing, authentic Indian restaurants in even some of the smallest places that we have visited.
And,
Um,
and I think in general, whether it's Indian or other ethnicities, I've had some fabulous ethnic foods in Canada.
Canada,
It's
I see.
highly recommended. Victoria, British Columbia, some of the best ethnic food you're going to find anywhere.
Ah. All right. So we are over time a little bit, but I'm going to take one last question, David, which is from Emilio Moreau, I guess. I hope that, again, I'm not murdering your name. Unlike individuals, teams change in terms of membership, their purpose, and the relations with other teams in the same organization. So their capabilities do not necessarily evolve in a linear way. So how do you account for both negative and positive changes in maturity in mapping to Kanban practices?
Yeah, I'm not the
I guess the
so the way I would describe this is, um, the Marine Corps' been around a couple of 100 years, I think longer than that, 240 years maybe. It's still the Marine Corps. And there's a concept of organizational institutionalization. So if some young man joins the Marine Corps, 18, 19 years old, perhaps as an officer cadet, serves well into his 40s, retires with the rank of colonel. By the time that person is retiring, almost everyone else in the organization, an organization that's tens of thousands, 100,000 people perhaps, have rotated out, apart from maybe a small handful of generals. The behavior of the organization is still the same. The technologies have changed, but the behavior is still the same. So how do you create a high maturity team, one that can rotate out an individual and bring in another one, and their performance doesn't change much, it doesn't dip very much? And that comes down to the institutionalization, even if it's only at a team scale. And honestly, I hate the word team. I hate it. Kanban has never been about teams, at least not in the Agile sense. Agile people think a team is like 3 people, 6 people, 9 people, maybe 12 people if you're lucky, size of a platoon in the armed forces. Kanban's never been about teams. It's been about much wider organizations. It's been about teams that cooperate and collaborate with each other in the name of customer service. It's always been about much bigger scale than just teams. But it doesn't matter. How do you get a team? Now, as a very young man, I was on a team in the Boy Scouts. We just call them the Scouts in the United Kingdom. And the behavior not only of my team, they're called a patrol, and our larger organization known as a troop, that can be institutionalized so that it continues to perform at a certain level, even though 10-year-old boys join and they kind of grow up, and at 16 years old they exit. And the whole time there's a flow changing 15-20% of the workforce every year. And yet our troop had a reputation for going to national competitions and winning or placing almost every year. Whether that competition was for pitching tents, building rope bridges over rivers, orienteering in the mountains, or rifle shooting. Right? And the organization had institutionalized how, if I started as a 10-year-old, by the time I was the patrol leader at 16, the way that I was leading the rest of the troop when we're camping somewhere at a competition, or we're hiking in the Scottish mountains, or we're just on a Friday night at the regular troop meeting, the way that I'm bringing up those new recruits, 10 and 11-year-olds, is the way that I was brought up. Low maturity organizations do not have that sort of institutional memory.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all about ultimately the leadership, the institutionalization, I guess, of anything that they do at that scale.
The mature organizations develop leaders, right? Whether it's the Scouts or the Marines, right? It's the same, right? Mature organizations develop leaders. It could be your school rugby team or your cricket team or whatever. I'm sure that you folks growing up in India, you knew the schools that were good at playing cricket, and they were still good at playing cricket 10 years later, 20 years later, because they had institutionalized how to stay good at playing cricket.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so I'm going to bring up the last slide here. Nishant, if you could just bring that up. I seem to not have control. Yeah, all right. Just wanted to share the contact information for David, and to make sure that all of you on the webinar today, if you wanted to connect with David and ask any further questions or follow up on the Kanban maturity model or anything related to Kanban that you heard today, that you can do so. If you'd like to take a look at Swift Kanban, which we have really tried to follow the Kanban method and the developments in the Kanban method very closely, especially how we map to the Kanban maturity model and how you can use different aspects of the tool at different levels. We in fact have a white paper that I think we'll send out a link to that as part of our follow-up email. Some of you asked, so let me just say that again, that we will be sending out a follow-up email with the slides and the recording, a link to the recording of the webinar in a couple of days. David, as always, it's always a great pleasure and an honor to do these webinars with you. Uh, as usual, a great session as well as fantastic conversation. And I'm sure everybody on the session today loved it. Thank you so much for doing it, and wish you a very relaxed and happy holiday season, and looking forward to a much better 2021, as I'm sure all of the people in these sessions are also doing.
Well, thank you very much for having me again, Mahesh. Thanks for the opportunity. And all I can say about this year is I'm sure that we're all going into next year stronger for having survived it. So I wish everyone a good holiday season, a happy new year, and much health and success in 2021.
Perfect. Thank you all so much, and stay tuned for our webinars for 2021. We look forward to seeing you again soon in another session. David, thanks a lot. Take care.